So we do in fact have frame damage. Okay, first off, I want to say a massive thank you to all of you that have tried to help me find parts for the C63, but today we need to get it inside the unit and on the ramp, one, before I freeze to death, and two, so we can find out, well, before we buy any parts, if this engine runs. So we know at the minute that this engine has no oil in it whatsoever, so we can't start it. The battery's completely flat. We need to move it into neutral so we can move it inside the unit. The problem is, this wheel is, well, it's pretty much not connected to anything, so we've got to sort of work out a way how we can get this or roll it or move it inside there. So first thing, I think battery pack. Let's get this thing in neutral and then, well, we'll go from there. So this job actually sounds easier than it was. First off, we put the battery pack on so we can move the car into neutral, then we can start pushing it around. My technique was to put a skate under the front driver's side wheel, then we was going to pull the car with the RS5, but the wheel just jumped off the skate. But being dragged forward was not a problem for the C63, it was when we tried to go back which was the issue. We ended up taking the driver's side wheel off, then using a pump truck for the front of the car. Then in the end we actually used Baz's Z4 drift car to push it into the unit. And with a little bit of adjustment left to right, we managed to position it in the two-post ramp. Ladies and gentlemen, the C63 has entered the building. Okay, there was a few things that we had to do and a few things that we noticed when pulling this C63 in. First off, the front driver's side wheel, well, they'd been welded to high heaven. Oh my giddy on. How is that tyre holding any air? And also had to remove the passenger side headlight as well, just so we could sort of push it in with the Z4. Now, it has such a good response on the last video, and I cannot thank all you guys enough for trying to help out with the build. But there's a few comments that sort of stood out to me, and one of them was from a police officer. Now, we pretty much gathered that this car was crashed after a little bit of a joyride, and then the police was involved at some point. But I thought this windscreen damage here was from the driver's head hitting the windscreen. But quite interestingly, and although it doesn't change much, the police officer said it's often a scare tactic for the police to actually hit the front windscreen with the baton and then smash the windows as a scare tactic, which sort of explains why that window smashed and also the passenger side window as well. Was this some sort of scare tactic when the drivers were stopped at a police chase? I don't know, but all I know, the car is smashed and I've got to fix it. So first thing I want to do, and I'm quite excited to do this, is get the car in the air for the first time and just check the damage underneath. I know the sump's damaged, but I also want to check all the chassis as well. Let's get it in the air. Now, someone actually mentioned because the car's got red brake calipers, it could be the performance package, but these definitely look like they've been DIY painted, not an original Mercedes paint. Going to look underneath the car, I can see the subframe's got a huge whack and a crack in it. Damage to the sump was as expected. The exhaust has been completely squashed, and there's a fair bit of damage to the actual floor of the car. Now, what I'm going to do whilst the car's in the air, there's a few bars which mount from the chassis to the actual subframe. I'm just going to measure these on both sides just to make sure that they're both equal and there's no bends in the chassis. And it actually turned out to be spot on. So, good news. So really, it's not too bad on it. Well, I say not too bad. It is bad, but most of it can all be replaced. So the sump isn't actually as bad as I first thought. Yes, it's dented, but I can't see it being dented enough to cause any damage to the actual bottom of the engine. And unlike the BMW M4, this sump has came in sort of two parts. You've got this black aluminium part here, and then this part at the top here, which is sort of aluminium as well. But that is a huge part of the sump, like the BMW M4. And if it was that part, I could imagine that being quite expensive. On the M4 is around 600 quid, but because it's only this part, I can't see it being too bad. But other than that, I don't actually think it's too bad. Yes, there's dents and scratches everywhere, and the exhaust is all squashed. That's going to need replacing, which we'll probably replace anyway. But the main thing, the chassis looks straight, sort of so far anyway.
Oh man, I wouldn't speak too soon, but if it all goes tits up, don't worry, Surfshark has got your back, as we've got the back with plenty of you guys as well.
Thanks Surfshark, that's really relieving to hear, but let me tell you how Surfshark can help you guys out as well. So Surfshark is a VPN tool, that stands for Virtual Private Network. That means it encrypts all the data sent via the internet so no one can steal your passwords, steal your videos, view your online messages, or see what you're doing online. Now, did you know that public Wi-Fi is a gold mine for hackers, but not when using Surfshark? And that's not the only thing it can do. Check this out. Let's say you want to watch a classic film like The Godfather, but it's just not available in the UK. That's where Surfshark are here to help. I can go to the top right-hand corner, change my browsing location to somewhere like Turkey, research for The Godfather, and there it is, ready to watch. So to get Surfshark today, click the link in the description box below, use code Matt Armstrong, and that's going to get you 83% off, plus an extra 3 months for free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee as well, so there is literally no risk. Thanks Surfshark for sponsoring this video. Back to the C63. Definitely going to need to replace the subframe. It's dented and it's cracked as well. And this is, well, the reason why this sort of suspension leg and the whole thing is all over the place, because, well, that suspension leg is non-existent, and then this one, it looks as if it's sort of ripped the bolt out of it. But again, all can be replaced when we change the subframe on the front. Now, there is going to be a lot of damage behind this arch lining, as you can see here, as I think the wheel's been pushed back into the chassis of the car there, but as we can see, the sort of door panels and the wing seem to line up, but we won't know for sure until we remove all of this arch lining. But what I want to concentrate on today is actually getting this thing running and started. The parts for this car are really expensive, and I don't want to buy anything until I know that this engine runs and we're all good to go. Now, I took the risk and I bought this C63 as a non-runner. I don't even know if the engine is any good. Part of the reason why the engine doesn't run is that the engine is completely dry. You can just see, even in here, how dry the top of the engine is. Well, the whole engine is completely dry. There's no oil in it at all. And that's partly to do with this oil cooler and that oil cooler. They sit fairly low in the car, and, well, they've taken a bit of a hit, and it's dropped pretty much all of the oil out. Not to mention the sump, which has been dented as well. Now, I actually think the sump is good enough to hold some oil as it is, but these oil coolers are definitely not. So what I'm going to do is pull these oil coolers off and replace it with like a silicone pipe. So we're almost doing like an oil cooler delete temporarily, just so we can see whether the engine starts, which, fingers crossed, it please start, please. So first things first, I'm just going to remove the crash bar just because it is damaged and it will need replacing. But once I've got that off, I can then start attacking the oil coolers. You can see the oil line runs in here, through the cooler, and then into a secondary cooler here, which is in the wheel well, which actually used to have a fan on it, and then it goes back into the engine. But what I'm going to do is bypass the coolers by putting a pipe from the first line and joining it to this second line here. So I'm going to be disconnecting the line going into this oil cooler and disconnecting the line that goes into this oil cooler, removing both the coolers from the car. I picked up a really long silicone hose and then connected the two lines, obviously only temporarily. Okay, this is the most sketchiest oil cooler delete pipe ever, but it should work. All the oil's going to do is go along that pipe and back up into the engine. But before I'm going to put any oil in it and try and start it, one thing I want to check is the oil filter. Make sure that there's no sort of metal filings in there, and well, that would sort of signify that this engine has well, gone before it even started. So let's get this oil filter off and just check it first. Oh my days. The good news is, well, I'm not going to pull the oil filter straight out because it's literally dropped a bit. It's half fits in the top there. But I can't see any metal filings in there, which is, well, good news. I'm not going to pull it out. I've not got another one to replace it just yet, but if it runs, obviously we'll get a new oil filter. So here we go, the moment of truth. I start pouring in some oil, and next minute, it comes straight back out the bottom. It was leaking drastically from somewhere, and we just couldn't work out where it was coming from. So right now, we've got an engine oil leak, which is, we're expecting the worst. I'm either expecting it to be a big window inside the engine, or it could be something that's not connected, but more than likely there's probably going to be a window in the engine, so we're expecting the worst now. Let's get this under tray off and see if we can see this window. Now I mentioned earlier there was two parts of the sump, this part on the bottom and then the part on the top. Well, I was actually wrong, there's three parts. There's another part on the front here, which again is part of the sump, and that seems to be the cause of this huge oil leak. But to get to it properly, I need to move the anti-roll bar out of the way just so I can access it. And then finally reveal the damage. Okay, situation is here. So we've got part of the sump, and it is, well, you can see the crack there. We think it's sort of like an impact crack off the anti-roll bar. But we've just found that this looks like an actual separate part of the sump just for the front section, and we're thinking maybe the reason behind that is so you can get to the engine chain or something during a service, so that part comes off separately. Either way, you've got to take the subframe off to get to it. We might be able to patch this up good enough just so it doesn't absolutely piss out, and that's exactly what we're about to do. So I cleaned it up first with a wire brush, got it as clean as possible, and I went to Halfords and I bought this epoxy putty thing. I wasn't expecting anything, but this thing seemed to work miracles. That fix seems, well, that's rock hard now, that putty. Let's see if that is gonna hold. Well, let's see if it holds the oil. Hopefully, well, there is going to be a few more leaks. Obviously, we've got the sump at the back here, which that's gonna leak, but it should hold it enough so we can, fingers crossed, start this thing. So here we go, second time lucky. I'm just putting in some old cheap oil for now. We will replace it if the engine is any good, but fingers crossed it holds all 8.5 litres this time. Right, it seems to be holding the oil. So we're going to be quick because we don't know how long it's going to hold it for. So let's connect the battery pack. I don't know whether it's got one of those pyrotechnic fuse things which cuts off the whole car when the airbags go off. And if it does, that's kind of good because we know that the car would have cut off when the car crashed. But it's also bad because that means I've got to find where it is and sort of bypass it to start the engine. Come on. It's the big moment. Is the C63 engine good? My hands are literally shaking. Oh my God, okay. Here we do. Nothing. Oh, here we go. Just getting a click. So we're just getting a click. Yeah, I think it's got one of those pyrotechnic things on the battery. I think it's cutting the ignition because there's a pyrotechnics thing on here, so we've just got to find where it is. Okay, so we just watched the video and apparently the pyrotechnics fuse is on the front here. So what this is doing is cutting the power. So here's your obviously positive terminal, and then here's your pyrotechnics fuse, this yellow part here, and that's cutting power to this cable here, which goes directly to the starter motor. Everything else will work, all the electrics will work, just not the starter motor. So if we put the jump leads directly to that, instead of going on the positive here, we might be able to bypass it. So let's see. Here we go. No, nothing. So I went back again to the fuse, but this time I took the starter motor cable off and connected it directly to the positive spade which you use to jump start the car. And hopefully this time it will work. Oh, yes, come on. Here we go. We started. Yes! Yes, it's running! Let's go! Yes!
All you wanna do is party, yo, I know. I know. You are the type that they warn me about. When I'm with you, all the wrong feels alright.
Sounds good.
She the real thing, but she cold-hearted like Greenland. Church girl moving like a queen pen. Hey, Yeah, my thing
Worked. Oh,
A working.
what a relief. What a relief. It started up first time, like first crank as well. Okay, we've got over the amount of oil that we should have in it, so I shouldn't run it for too long. Yes, it's running! No more oil coming out. Oh, she's running! Yes! Oh my god, and there's no oil on the floor, permanent fix. That was literally as if that worked. Oh. So we're going to need to get pyrotechnics fuse to sort of redo that. But good news is that it starts and it runs. And what a relief that was. A broken but yet running C63. Oh, it's been over a night now and I still can't believe that that actually worked. Just look at the absolute bodge job on the sump at the front here. It's only slightly trickling out oil now. That thing is absolutely solid. So now obviously we've got to find the front part of the sump and the rear part of the sump and then drop all that old oil out before putting some fresh oil in and give it a nice service. But there's a few things we've got to do, well, more than a few things we've got to do before we even get to that. Now I have noticed even more things whilst I've been underneath the car, and one of them is pretty much every wheel has gone. It's got a crack in it, that one's got a crack in it, that one's actually okay, and the front passenger one has also got a crack in it. Another thing that quite surprised me, this car is really rusty underneath, and that rust is probably explained here. This postcode and this area is in Scotland. As you guys know, Scotland isn't the driest of places and it's got fairly salty roads, which was probably the cause of all that rust underneath the car. But despite all that, now we can crack on with getting on with the more like cosmetic fixes. Now we know the car's kind of mechanically okay. And I've just found this as well. Looking at the expansion tank, you can actually see, well, it's holding nearly all of its coolant. There's actually no leaks at all. So the cheapest radiator pack that I actually found, the whole rad pack with all of the radiators on, was £1,100. But I think I could actually get away with not actually replacing the whole thing. I mean, the radiator does look pretty battered at the bottom and it's not going to be doing its job to its full potential. So probably I will just change the radiator instead of buying a full rad pack. This looks a little bit dented in, but not too bad at all. I mean, not £1,100 worth of damage, I don't think. So that's part of the good news. But one thing that I've been itching to do is get this damaged wing off and just see if there's any more damage behind the wing that we can't actually see. This is one of my favourite parts of doing a crash damaged car, is removing all the damaged parts, and it sort of resets you then back to stage one and you can rebuild the car from there. But doing this actually revealed more problems. So we do in fact have frame damage. Now it looks as if this chassis damage has been caused by the wheel. That suspension arm snapping has allowed the wheels to be pushed back into the sort of arch in the chassis of the car and causing, well, a fair amount of damage. The difference between now and last time we had chassis damage, we have a lot more knowledge on what can be fixed and what can't be fixed. And I have confidence that this can definitely be fixed. I think we can do this. So we know that this suspension leg is free to move wherever it wants, and that has pushed the wheel into this part of the chassis here. We can see this part is creased and this part right here is almost curving off at the end, and then this part is also creased up. Now if you were to do a fat bodge job, you could bodge this up. So as far as we know at the minute, the frame legs and the actual frame of the car, where the subframe mounts to it and everything like that, is all straight. There's nothing drastically out of line, so it should drive straight once we've got all the new suspension on, the subframe, and we've got it all lined up. It is a good idea to get it on a jig just to make sure though. So this part of the car isn't really going to affect the way it drives. It just looks nasty and obviously it isn't right. Now as I mentioned, you could bodge it. These are spacers for the wings, so you could absolutely space out the wing on this side, put in the wing on that side, and the wing would sit nice and straight. You put your arch lining in and no one would ever know. But we're not doing that. We've got to do this thing properly. So I think we have two options here. The first option is we can try and pull this thing out as straight as possible, but it's still is going to have that crease in it, and it's still not going to be 100%. So that leaves us with option number 2. So these parts here, which have been seam sealed there, and we can actually even see some of the joins here. We know that these little circles means that it's been spot welded, and they're all separate parts of metal. Now, as we've done on the Audi, we bought the separate parts of metal directly from Audi, and we've been able to chop off the damaged part and re-weld on the new part. Now, I'm hoping we may be able to buy the parts separately, but worst case, I've seen some places selling the chassis from the door onwards, sort of just this frame leg right here. And if we can get that, then we should be able to cut out the parts which are damaged and re-weld in the new parts. Yes, it's a big job, but I'm determined that this is going to be on the road, and this is going to be my daily car. Now, say for a trader or someone who's trying to flip this car to make money, it probably wouldn't be worth it. So that's why I've got to say a massive thanks to you and all of you guys watching the videos, hitting the subscribe button, hitting the thumbs up button, commenting down below, buying the merch, buying the cleaning products. It all really helps when trying to rebuild cars like this. It just wouldn't happen if it wasn't for you guys. But we're on a mission with this C63. There's not going to be many big V8 cars made anymore, so we're trying to save all of them. And we're going to have one hell of a good time repairing them and finally getting them back on the road. If you've enjoyed this video, hit that subscribe button, hit that thumbs up button, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.